We're gonna take a walk down Blue Island because I grew up around this neighborhood and it's changed a lot in the last couple of years. This building's probably 100 years old, maybe more. Used to be a bank a long time ago. Probably when all the little factories used to be around here and all the people worked in factories. And they lived in all these buildings around here. Like that one over there across the street. Looks like it hold a lot of people, a lot of workers. Let's take a walk down this way.
So, what is Pilsen to you?
Pilsen feels like family to me. Feels very homey.
Why is that?
I don't know. Growing up around here, I just always had that feel of, you know, like when you go to one of your favorite tia's house or your grandma's house, and you just feel comfortable. And then you go to other people's house, and you're like a little bit more like reserved. You're not like completely yourself. And I've grown up in different areas in the city, so Pilsen's always felt like the most comfortable.
You can travel the globe in search of the world's coolest neighborhoods, or you can venture down 18th Street, Pilsen. Forbes magazine named it one of the world's 12 destinations. Here's Vince Girasole.
This is all different. I guess neighborhoods changing.
As we welcome people, and we welcome your residents, we also want to make sure that they respect the people who live here. And we work together to find solutions and find a very inclusive, sustainable community.
It's already grateful to travel. Yes, there are legitimate concerns about gentrification, but there's also a strong commitment to keeping the area true to its roots.
18th Street in Pilsen is one of the most prominent streets here in the city of Chicago. This is because, from a tourist standpoint to a local resident standpoint, it is so prominent in what it is to be a person who is from Pilsen. This goes from its murals to its arts, to its posters, to the shops. One of the things that saddens local Pilsen residents is when buildings shut down. When the buildings that they've gone to, growing up to, are no longer here. They leave, or they just can't afford the community anymore. What is the reason for that? This is Pilsen In Grey. Yeah.
In the case of Pilsen, we started in the East End, relatively quietly, relatively slow, and it started accelerating in the 90s and more in the 2000s, and it has reached the point in which it has a life of its own. So you could mitigate it, you could act to slow it down, you could act to allow people to stay, but they are not doing that.
Since the 1960s and 70s, Pilsen served as a port of entry for Mexican and other Latin American immigrants coming to the United States for the very first time. Once being a predominantly European settlement in the 1800s, many left Pilsen to purchase homes in the suburbs as they became more attractive in the 1950s. This is called the White Flight.
As the families that originate here, as they build up their wealth and they're able to save some money, they wanted to go ahead and buy a home. And so that really started happening. The wealthier Lithuanians and Polish community, they started going to a little village, for example, in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and that was considered the suburbs almost. And so you've seen these big changes of people moving out. The American dream is not like a 3-flat. This isn't New York, right, where everyone is used to living in an apartment, and even then that's not always the case. So the neighborhood really started to change, and after the war, you saw the people, the GI Bill and the expansion of FHA mortgages and federally guaranteed mortgages really allowed the white community essentially to pick up and move into other neighborhoods as their wealth was increasing.
The only difference again is white suburbanized, looking for opportunities, and because they could afford it. Latinos are suburbanizing by force, and blacks are leaving the city by force because they just can't be in the city.
You know, I think that's an open question. People want to see the culture maintained, but you know, part of what made Pilsen what it is the constant refreshing of that culture. So you know, it was Czechs, and then you know. In 1919, they got their independence, and that turned off the flow of immigrants from Czechoslovakia.
As a result, Latin American immigrants came in to fill the void that was left by people who moved out by choice.
Los güeros que se fueron para los suburbios, los que vivían en Pilsen, dejaron un barrio sin mecanismos para ayudar a los obreros. Entonces fueron los verdaderos años de la lucha en Pilsen.
Continuando con enfoque, las transformaciones económicas y sociales que están ocurriendo en varias ciudades de Estados Unidos están desplazando a residentes de barrios latinos emblemáticos.
I literally couldn't find anything under $900 for 2 bedrooms. And when I left Pilsen at a younger age, I remember the rents were anywhere from like $450 to $550. So it was like a big okay, it's been a while, it's been a number of years. So it was very hard for me to find an affordable apartment for myself and my kids.
Been in the process of gentrification all over the city of Chicago, right? Even in neighboring neighborhoods. Pilsen stays true to its culture.
Pilsen makes Pilsen because it's people. I mean, we cannot talk about Pilsen without talking about its people, right? Talk about the paleteros, talk about the people who make the day-to-day, the sellers or tamales, who sell us ice cream. I mean, this is what makes Pilsen, the diversity by the working class people that has made this community is such a unique community across the city. There's nothing like this.
Overall, it's the culture of guerreros and guerreras that we have in this community, right? On top of the art and on top of the food and the culture and the community, all of that, I think, are products of the organizing culture that we've had in this community, right? The culture that has had to fight for what it wants, for what it needs, in spite of leadership oftentimes. Right? And I think because of that, Pilsen is what it is today.
Pilsen isn't unique in its experience of gentrification. There are other neighborhoods that have experienced gentrification in the city of Chicago as well. Wicker Park, Logan Square, and Humboldt Park. But there are also other neighborhoods in the United States that have experienced gentrification. In Los Angeles, Jefferson Park and West Adams are 2 neighborhoods that have experienced gentrification recently. And in New York's Manhattan region, Soho and Harlem are 2 neighborhoods that have historically been gentrified as well.
The narrative that they're pushing, to me, seems that they assume that everyone that is upwardly mobile, that people want to stay in the neighborhood, but that it's getting too expensive and the rents are going up and therefore they cannot stay. And
we see the changes, right? What we need to see is also how we can keep the balance, right? And some of these trends are not normal. When we talk about displacement being normalized, right? When we have, inspectors coming in, cahoots with developers, right? And we have we can have convicted companies who have been caught up in these schemes that are practicing those schemes here in Pilsen. So those things are not the free market or the invisible hand, right? Like the economist said. I'm an economist by trade, but I understand also when the economy is not helping and is not working for the many, it's working only for a very few.
Oh, it's the alderman's fault that gentrification is happening because he's doing nothing to stop it, or it's these people's fault, or whatever. But I think for me, I think that's the wrong way to look at it. I think gentrification is happening everywhere, around the entire country. It's a problem that we're all dealing with, And to be honest, gentrification, the way that I was taught as a child, being that I'm the daughter of parents who were involved in the Harold Washington campaign and fought the machine when Daley was mayor and so forth. It's really, it's been in the works. It's been a plan for quite some time. And it's not really any one person to blame here. I think when people want to live somewhere, they're going to try and live there. And if they have the money to do it, they're going to do it. I think it's super just irresponsible to blame it on one entity.
Gentrification, first of all, is happening all over the world. It doesn't discriminate just because it's a neighborhood that is predominantly Hispanic or African American. The issues of gentrification are happening in London, in Europe, in Los Angeles, and in New York. And at the end of the day, I think what people are upset about is that their way of life is changing. And what they know and love is going to change. But that happens in everything. In every neighborhood, across the city and across the world, there isn't a neighborhood that has remained the same for every generation. It's the same. Sometimes it comes from a place of fear that they're not going to be a part of that change, or that it's going to improve and not improve for them. But it's just a way of life in terms of the things that happen, in every neighborhood, and across the world, really.
The city appointed an alderman that was in line with them, and in that way they opened the floodgates. The community was saying no, 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 and was resisting. Now the floodgates were open, and gentrification started coming in.
In terms of the population, the white flight, and back to your question, is that yes, it's somewhat similar, is that as they were upwardly mobile and able to afford a different neighborhood, that is what the Hispanic community did, just like every other ethnic group that came before us. It's just that now there's this notion that you're being kicked out because others are moving in, and that's not necessarily the case.
And it frustrates me to hear people push that narrative, because I got white friends that have moved into the neighborhood. They're not rich. They're poor. They're on food stamps. They're on Medicaid. These are not wealthy people, but their families are losing houses too. So for them to come here, and then for people to be like, white people get out, like this was their grand plan, was to lose their house and have to move here. That pisses me off.
I view this work of tackling issues of changes through the lens of giving people the resources that they need. I don't look at it as just a black and white, because I know that the world doesn't work that way. The world works in this shade of gray. And so I don't see everything as just negative or positive, because if I did, then I wouldn't be able to really function in coming up with solutions. Does that make sense? So one of my favorite quotes I have said is F. Cox Fitzgerald's quote, which is, true intelligence, or intelligence, is measured by the ability to hold two opposing ideas and still function, right? And so I think in Pilsen and all over the United States, we have this dichotomy or this binary approach of gentrification, anti-gentrification, that is not really addressing how to actually bring about solutions.
The city of Chicago had a plan. In 1973, they announced that plan, which was to redevelop Pilsen into pretty much a middle-class community. And the community mobilized against it, and the city of Chicago had to table it. Now, gentrification is a different enemy. It's the city plus, it's not the city alone. So fighting gentrification when the city is in favor of it is very difficult.
I think people do racialize it, but I don't think it needs to be completely racialized all the time. I think it is majority Caucasian people who end up gentrifying because they're the people with the wealth. That is true. But gentrification can take a lot of different forms, and it can have a lot of different color faces and so forth. And I think gentrification really is an institutionalized problem. It comes from, why are white people rich, right? And why are people of color poor? That's a systematic problem. So it's not so much like this is a white or black issue, right? This is a systematic issue. The reason why this continues to be an issue is because there's something wrong with the system. And there's a lot of aspects to that. It has to do with our quality of education. It has to do with the food we eat. It has to do with the resources that we are exposed to and so forth. So I think it's more, I think instead of saying it's a racial issue, I think we should say it's a systemic issue.
The conversation needs to also not be about race. This is a Hispanic community. It was obviously a Mexican community, but that has not always been the case. And I go to some of these meetings where they'll say this needs to stay a Mexican neighborhood. You can't do that. You know, if somebody said this needs to be a white neighborhood no matter what, we would be all upset about it. But they seem to not have a problem by openly saying that we should somehow limit the ethnicity of the newcomers of the neighborhood. That doesn't work. It's not productive, and it's not who this city is. So those are some of my solutions, but I'm not running for alderman.
One of the things that makes Pilsen attractive is its murals. From new to old murals, most of it represent and embody what it is to be Mexican in Pilsen. Or so people say. Recently we interviewed Marcos Raya, who was a Pilsen muralist who originally painted the Casa Atilano mural, all three of them. Now this is a mural of Frida Kahlo with a monarch butterfly wings. What does this actually mean about Pilsen? And what does this actually mean to be Mexican in Pilsen? You can come there.
We have enough. It was a total of 4 gigabytes yesterday.
That looks so aesthetic.
Let's go.
Oh my god.
Mira, a mí que me robaron la imagen de Casa Atilano y se la dieron a alguien que ni siquiera es del barrio, me dejó bien tramado. Porque yo pinté Casa Atilano no una vez, sino 3 veces.
Sí.
Ahí están las 2 muestras, ¿ves?
Como sucedió con este mural que por décadas estuvo plasmado en la antigua sede del centro comunitario Casa Atilano, ahora ha sido borrado.
Todo el mundo sabe en Chicago que estos murales son la representación de una cultura. Entonces es como tratar de borrar no solo los murales, pero tratar de borrar la existencia de una comunidad.
On June 20th of 2017, a Virgil was head out of what was once known as Casa Atilano, which was a historic building in Pilsen that once served as a resource for Mexican migrants coming into the United States for the very first time. The building was bought out by an urban developer who works for City Pads LLC. And now, what was the reason for this Virgil? Controversially, the murals that encompassed the entire building were painted over in gray. This action was a slap in the face to the people who lived in Pilsen because of what it symbolizes. As a result, the Pilsen Alliance was one of the organizations that protested against the developer, as well as blaming Ram Emanuel and Danny Solis for the controversy.
Casa Atilano was there because people came together and wanted a community center where they can feel a part of something. And so much of our community, of our neighborhood was built because of the fight that people put in.
It's like a domino effect of feelings, I think, with individuals as artists, as a community member, and just, within living here, because having this sense of this is a really old place and it doesn't seem like a lot of people are putting money or resources into it to keep it alive, and it was a little sad when I visited, because I was working with somebody and they were helping them with like some tech stuff, like computer things, and and it just kind of felt like that heaviness. And so when it closed down a number of years after that, unfortunately, right, to say, like, it didn't surprise me, and it was like sad, but I didn't really see or feel like a lot of people came to try to help keep that going, right? And then
the Casa Aztlán story is quite interesting. I think a lot of people took it to be like, oh, it's whitewashing the neighborhood and everything else. And while yes, it was terrible that developer painted over the murals, the real issue is that the executive director of Casa Aztlán essentially had pulled out a loan for leverage against the property, and then he wasn't able to repay it. And so then the bank essentially foreclosed on the property and was foreclosing, but they ended up selling the note, meaning they sold the amount that was due, and another investor bought it, and then that investor bought and sold the building. They had an opportunity to sell the building, but it really came down to the leadership of Casa Aztlán not being proactive in trying to sell the property or refinance the debt. And so everyone says like, oh, the neighborhood is we're losing all the people that were there and everything else. But really, it was the lack of leadership within Casa Aztlán and their board that really didn't take the threat seriously. And I really don't understand how it is they could have walked away from a property of that size. And essentially, the debt that they had taken on was not even that much money. We're talking about $100,000.
Resistance to gentrification disappeared in Pilsen. Only in 1998, a group of the community got together and created Pilsen Alliance, and Pilsen Alliance started reorganizing the resistance, but it did not count on the other community organizations. So it didn't have the support of the biggest community organizations in Pilsen. I don't want to name them. I know their names, but I don't want to mention them.
A lot of the nonprofits in the neighborhood are tied to the neighborhood. And so I won't pick on any one organization, but they feel that if they move their offices to another neighborhood, that they're somehow leaving a piece of their DNA. And that is where you started, and wherever your roots might be. But at the end of the day, their nonprofit, their mission is to serve the people that they need to serve. And if those people have moved to Little Village or Southwest or to Back of the Yards or to Cicero, then they need to move those offices to where the need is. There's this sense that somehow you're selling out the neighborhood if you leave, or if you don't keep your nonprofit in the neighborhood or your business in the neighborhood or whatever it might be. But we shouldn't do that. In any real estate, you should always, or considering any real estate, you should always look at it as where is it the best for my family, my business, my organization. You get to take memories with you. I keep saying that, but there's always someone that wants to hold on to what they remember. And what you remember is great, but that's not necessarily what serves you today. So you need to be able to let go of what you think the neighborhood was, or it's not that today. And unfortunately, you trying to preserve it is not working. So that's my 2 cents at least.
But as much as I think that I know that there's been a exodus, right, of Latinos leaving, there's actually now like this generation of Latinos coming back also. But it's not then about culture or where you're from. It's like money. Money talks in Pilsen now. It's not really like what color you are, that you were born and raised here, or you're Mexican or not Mexican. It's like, if you have the money to be here, like we have, it's so diverse here, but it really is now about like money.
How many people, you guys, how many people do you know say, I moved to Pilsen because of this school? I can't think of many people. People move to Pilsen today because it's up and coming, it's trendy, it's the new Wicker Park, Logan Square.
We're here in Pilsen, Chicago at Common Racine. So I guess now's a great time to tell you about Common, co-living and all of that. Common is currently in a couple major cities, New York, Chicago, DC, San Francisco, etc. Another great thing about Common, let's say you move into this home here, sorry Seymour, you gotta move to New York. Sorry Sally, you gotta move to San Francisco. Reach out to our customer service team when you're a member, and we actually will work with you and transfer you over to another home. Outside we have the BBQ area. Our members are gonna be out here on a really nice day like today, tossing the pigskin, hanging out, soaking up the sun.
sipping some coffee, working out here, whatever the case may be. You're coming home inside, you don't really have to worry about fumbling with your keys. We have keyless access on the gate, this door, and also your suite. It's a great bang for your buck. It's a great value. Like, it's awesome. Rooms are starting at $950.
You know what? I think it could be easy for people to try to figure out what was the cause, like what was the one cause. I think, you know, when you have a community center like that or a community space, it really involves more than just the people managing it. It takes, you know, community members to work together, and if the management of spaces like that, if there's not good dialogue, good communication, then ultimately, you know, you're like butting heads all the time, and you're not going to be able to keep something sustainable.
They bought a building that once you buy that building and you're not asking me for a zoning change, you can do whatever you want to in that building within the parameters of the zone that it has. If I had said, if they bought that building and they came to me because they want a higher zoning to put more housing in there, then that would be a development. What Casa Aztlán did, they did it within the parameters of what they could do with the zoning that they had for that building. Pilsen Land Use Committee interviewed Michael Fox, who is the developer there. They finally got an agreement with him in terms of what he was willing to do. They sent that recommendation to me to support it. I said, okay, I'll support it. Now we'll have the community meetings. We had 2 community meetings at the site. Pilsen Alliance was there. They spoke against it. The rest of the people were for it, and that's when we okayed it. So in terms of your question, it doesn't start and end at the Pilsen Land Use Committee. It starts there, then it comes to me, then it goes back to the community.
What happened is that Alderman Solis appointed a handful of organizations to represent the community for these discussions. The Pilsen Alliance was not invited, even though that we were the ones who proposed the referendum, and the whole thing, the creation of the Pilsen Land Use Committee, happened because of the Pilsen Alliance. But yet, they did not want to have an organization that represents neighbors at the table.
Pilsen Land Use Committee is made up of organizations that have long-standing history in Pilsen. Not only have they been around for a long time in Pilsen, they've actually done some very good things. Alivio, the 18th Street Development Corporation, Sin Fronteras, Resurrection Project. As I said earlier, this is an organization, a preeminent organization in the city that has built hundreds of affordable units for seniors, for poor people, for college students, for families. They have, who have I missed?
Pilsen Neighbors.
Pilsen Neighbors, probably the longest standing organization that has, they worked when I was with them to get the West Side Tech, to get the Rudy Lozano Library, to get Perez School built for Perez instead of Kamensky. So all these organizations have a track record and they've actually done something. Pilsen Alliance has not done anything. All they do is they criticize. And they used to be part of my Pilsen Land Use Committee, but when I said, I don't want you in my committee, it was when we had a meeting, community meeting for the development that was happening, I think on 16th and Carpenter, and there were young people like you whose parents had lived in Pilsen but had moved out to Little Village or Cicero, and they were now college graduates, young professionals, and they wanted to move into that building on Carpenter and 16th. They wanted to apply. Pilsen Alliance people, leaders, got up and said, well, you left. I don't care if you're Mexican, you left, you can't come back here, you left. That's when I said, time out. Pilsen Land Use Committee, I'm not going to support that kind of attitude. So, Pilsen Land Use Committee is mine, you're out, I'm going to work with the other guys, period.
I think it's helpful for people to know that the buck stops with the alderman, and these land use committees are provide political cover. Beyond that, for me, it's just platitudes and promises that politicians usually make.
What do you think the current alderman has done wrong?
He has been paid by developers. I mean, his whole campaign funds, 90% of the funds come from big developers as his own chair. So when you get funded by developers, you compromise your ability to represent the residents, and I think that's what's happening.
So the main misconception that the critics have about there's no development in Pilsen that's happening in a big scale. What's happening in Pilsen is speculators are buying properties and they're building them up, charging more rent, but that's something I can't do something about. And so when the critics say, oh, Alderman Solis is selling out to developers and gentrifying Pilsen, that's not the case. The developers are not in Pilsen. Think about it. The one big development that is here in Pilsen is on 18th and Peoria, but we're not letting them develop unless they commit 21%, and they're not doing it. If you can think of any other development happening in Pilsen in terms of residential, you can't think of it.
That vacant lot that's at 18th and Peoria, like, that's doing nothing. That's helping nobody. You know, if you build a bunch of luxury units there, you'll take some of the pressure off of the rest of the neighborhood. But there's going to be less of that if you throw up, you know, a whole bunch of units there, and if you include that 20% affordable housing on site.
Because he wants to stay in power and he needs the votes. Try to soften up certain things. So, for instance, he agreed that any development should have 21% affordable units. He appointed a committee to advise him on land use decisions, on zoning decisions. So he tried to soften up, but it was more symbolic than real.
So the Pilsen Land Use Committee was not successful because the mandate that the alderman put on there of making it 20% affordable, which if you believe that is a necessary component of any neighborhood for affordable housing, it cannot just be in one neighborhood. You can't just say that this one neighborhood needs to be 20% affordable mandate, because what ends up happening is development goes everywhere else. It's like plugging a hole and expecting the water to stop rising when the water's still coming in. It's just gonna go somewhere else. And so that has continued to happen. So, you know, there's a lot that they could have done, but I think that the alderman was trying to appease some group of people that saw him as a sellout of Vendido, regardless of what he did. Right? If he fixed the street, it's because he was for gentrification. And if he didn't fix that very same street, it's because he hated Mexicans. Right? And so it's like, where did he go? One way or the other, people were gonna be upset, and it was, you know, not really gonna work in any way.
It's happening everywhere, and to be honest, Pilsen has held on longer than any other neighborhood that I know of. Wicker Park got turned over in a matter of like 6 years. Humboldt Park is not really Humboldt Park anymore if you go over there. It's pretty much all the way gentrified. You know, so Pilsen has still got its roots here, and there's a lot of owners that own their homes that are Latino, and a lot of Latino-owned businesses that still are here, and that's because there is things that Pluck has done to make sure that we keep affordable housing in our neighborhoods. And there are things that the alderman has tried to do to implement some policies and some kind of like just standards so that we can continue to preserve our community. But like I said, if the community doesn't take ownership of its own community, then I mean, you really can't blame anyone, can you, right? It's on us.
Especially like a mí me dio coraje cuando vi al ese que trajeron de allá, al Rey Patrán, diciendo de que yo pinté a Rory, yo pinté, puras mentiras. Puras mentiras, ese güey se fue en 1974 y jamás volvió. Ni siquiera conoció a Rory Lozano. Entonces a mí me duele eso porque nadie de la comunidad me respaldó. Llegar a mi rescate y decir, no ocurre eso.
Tell us to get out. The guy just keeps looking at us.
You want to shit?
The guy, ahorita te digo.
Vámonos.
Yeah?
If you look at the screen, we have Raquel Guerrero. I met Raquel in late 1974 when I first started at Pilsen Neighbors. I saw in her a committed leader. Even when she was raising her 11 children, she was a relentless fighter.
The Chinese Consolidated Benevolent Association of Community Organization Chinatown. Thank you very much. NBC Universal, the bank.
I am not a king. I can't tell somebody, you can't sell your building, you cannot buy the building, you cannot raise your, I can't do that. If I could, maybe I would try to do it, but that would be illegal. I would get in trouble. So there are people moving out. But that can be said all the way back to when the history of Pilsen began.
Solis was appointed by Daley. He wasn't even a politician. He was appointed to be alderman when Medrano was indicted, and he became alderman forever, as happened with most of them, particularly if they are supported by the machine. And the issue is this, because the machine controls so many resources.
When my predecessor got in trouble, got indicted, went to jail, he asked me to consider being appointed in 1996. After a lot of thought, I accepted, and so since that time to now, which is about 23 years, I've been able to do a lot of things in all my ward, not just Pilsen. To every neighborhood has improved. For example, University Village didn't exist. Now it exists. Chinatown has become the top Chinese American neighborhood in the United States. Pilsen just recently got recognized as one of the quote-unquote coolest neighborhoods in the world. South Loop is going to be the next big neighborhood in the city. They're calling it the 78, which is for the 78th neighborhood along the river. West Loop, Taylor Street. These are all neighborhoods that I consider to have improved and become much better neighborhoods than when I first came in.
After this, I'm going to ask you a question.
Okay, so stand first?
Yeah, so get ready to record us walking again.
I was scared you were going to say that. I fear for my life when I walk like that.
Since 1996, Danny Solis has been alderman of the 25th Ward. This ward includes Pilsen, Chinatown, West Loop, and Little Italy. One question we had throughout the entirety of the production of this documentary was, is Danny Solis really the sole core of the problem of gentrification in Pilsen, or is he simply a scapegoat? Danny Solis was one of the most powerful aldermen in the city of Chicago, being the head board member of the zoning committee. He had a huge power graph in city politics. That was until the controversies came out.
The case of the AWOL alderman, nobody has seen 25th Ward Alderman Danny Solis in public since the bombshell revelation that he had worn a wire to record conversations with his fellow aldermen and secretly recorded Illinois House Speaker Mike Madigan.
Since the Chicago Sun-Times first reported on the undercover alderman, exposing that Solis had worn a wire to help the FBI investigate Alderman Ed Burke, with the feds alleging Solis traded favors for sex acts, Viagra, and donations, he's been a council outcast. And the alderman, again, has not been seen in weeks. He did resign from his position as the chairman of the zoning committee. However, he does retain his aldermanic seat on the city council. He retains that seat until May, when he retires. There are 5 contenders vying for that seat here in the 25th Ward.
I mean, we were the first ones to come out that morning and say that he needed to resign, right?
Yeah.
Because you can't serve the people of the 25th Ward and work for the FBI at the same time.
Yeah.
So since then, we've been avid on being vocal about his resignation for alderman and committeeman. Because that's just the epitome of what's wrong with Chicago politics, right? And it's not, it wasn't necessarily shocking information. Maybe the details were a little shocking.
Yeah.
But it's just reveals, it took the blanket off, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it showed everyone that this is Chicago politics as usual. This is we need to take advantage of this moment that we have right now to elect new leaders that will move forward.
And when Alderman Solis disappeared, what were we left with?
Get the fuck out. Get the fuck out. I'm scared.
Are you waiting for the community to change so you can cash in?
That feeling when the white guy is like, hey, you do things, you pour through, and you
see Jesus in like the hall, you see you guys. You're calling the cops! You're calling the cops! I thought you were here for the community!
In the 5-year struggle to build Benito Juarez, and later on, Rudy Lozano Library, among other issues that affected Pilsen during that time. She was a force to be reckoned with, but she also had a good heart and helped those less fortunate. Raquel Guerrero and other leaders exemplify the power of organizing and leadership development.
You want to do the whole thing, or we're good? Let's just go.
It's on you, Irvin. Do you think she needed to do it again?
What was the question?
Should we have her read the whole paragraph again, or should we?
The first paragraph.
Okay, first paragraph.
In the last 5 to 10 years, coffee shops like the one we're in today opened up on 18th Street in Pilsen. What's the harm in that, you might ask? In 2015, a coffee shop by the name of Gold Trust on 18th Street was targeted by an anonymous person. They left 2 hateful signs outside the coffee shop saying that the coffee that they serve smells like racism and classism. Another instance of the same situation is back in 2017 when the window of Thalia Hall was vandalized with the same message, "Get out."
And whether you are really a racist or whether you're using racism as an opportunity to try to connect yourself with the Mexican community, it's wrong. If this was white people doing that, if this was black people doing that against any other racial or cultural group, it would be called out. And so they did that at Hai Su restaurant, and then most recently they've been working at this senior development on Blue Island in Oakley, where they've graffitied the vans, and they've told them the same thing: get out, you're not Mexican. You can't do that, you know.
They associate, to me, gentrification with only one ethnic group. And I have tenants that pay, that live in my buildings, and they pay market rent. There's a building I have with 4 apartments in it. 3 of the 4 apartments are occupied by Hispanics. Only one of those 4 apartments is actually occupied by a white couple that lives there. So these changes are happening, but it's not as exaggerated as what they put out there.
I've certainly seen like longtime residents, creative people or business, entrepreneurs like open up their shops and their businesses, and that's very empowering to see that. So definitely, very supportive and advocate for those things. But I've also seen big money come into this neighborhood and just pop up a restaurant or a boutique in the framework of what opens up like in Wicker Park or on the north side of the city. It follows a template, a format, and it doesn't feel authentic. And I think any space that uses the word authentic already is trying to overcompensate for what they really are. So I think when I see that and new businesses open, I'm like, why are you saying authentic if you are what you are? You don't need to say it.
In any movement, right? In any movement for justice, for equality, for just fairness, there's always people, individuals, organizations that are, used to provoke, to cause division. I don't want to name any organizations in specific, but I think if you're approaching things as a provocateur, which means you're going to places to stir things up with your cameras out, then you're obviously, you want a reaction, and you want a reaction that's going to benefit you and take away attention from the actual problem. And I think that we have to be a little bit more cautious as people in the community, and specifically as leaders, to be able to identify a provocateur when we see one, and to learn how to confront those people but still be able to do the work that needs to be done. Because while they're provoking, they're not really doing work in the community.
It's almost like you need somebody to be the bad guy to tell you what to see, you know, to be the devil's advocate in, you know, let's say a new business popping up in the neighborhood.
It is easy to polarize everything. It is easy to attack and work from negativity. That's easy, right? But to build, you don't build from negativity. You build from positivity. You build from love. You build from hope, right?
Raquel Guerrero has left her mark in this community, in this high school. May she rest in power.
Today's election day, and there's literally signs everywhere. I don't know what's going on, but yeah, it seems exciting.
Tips. In the next couple of years, we're going to end tips, right? So where are you going to get the money from, Byron? That's something you have to understand. That we, the community, you gotta stop thinking about just giving tips. You have to understand why tips were created for in the first place. I just think that Byron's solution is everything is taking money from the bankers. The question was, how is it Speaking of corruption and investigation, I have a pledge here from Mr. Sikcho. This pledge is for indicating that if there's, this is not a pledge to me, this is a pledge to the people, indicating that if there's any illegal activity or any fraud that was caught during this past campaign or during early voting, that your pledge to disqualify yourself from this race.
So the 2018 election was insane, and this was how some of us coped with the insanity.
We're voting for mayor, and for alderman, and for city clerk, and treasurer, and...
Let's go into the documentary.
Yes. We're Mexican. Hold on. We're Mexican, so like 5 of us can legally vote, and most of us.
I only did that so I could sync it.
And most of us are still 17. So, yeah.
Most of us are also undocumented, so.
Vote matters. Wait, voting matters.
Vote matters. I don't know how this works into the documentary, but you know, honestly, this is going in. This is funny. This is good content. Like Shane Dawson does this. Great.
Anything else before I do it? That means I'm Shane Dawson. No, you're not. I'm Shane Dawson. Shane Dawson.
It says we're at Rush University Medical Center.
I'm still Shane Dawson.
To understand just how complex the 25th Ward aldermanic election was, let's just look at the political mail that we all received. This is it. Some of it is relatively the same with the same talking points and policies that they all want to achieve if they get elected as aldermen, while some of them stuck out to us. We received this real attack ad against Byron Sikcho Lopez, suggesting the investigation of him buying votes in Chinatown, which Alex Acevedo stated in the debate earlier. This was sent by Alex Acevedo's people. We also received a similar attack ad that's vice versa, from Byron's people showing his previous support to then Mayor Rahm Emanuel and Governor Bruce Rauner. Also, Chuy Garcia endorsed Lori Lightfoot, which is cool, I guess.
In the last elections, there was an interesting thing that happened in the little village area back of the yards when a group of independent, progressive Latinos were elected and defeated candidates of the machine. That was interesting because that is an expression that the community is taking control, is taking charge. Will they be re-elected? I don't know if the machine goes after them. But another thing that happens is many times when the community elects independent people, the machine co-ops them, buys them up, and eventually they just falls into the machine, and the independent movement ends with that.
They're running an election as if they're running for the Senate. They forget that an alderman's job is to fix the streets, the sidewalks, to improve the schools.
I don't doubt that whoever gets in could possibly do a good job, but the way that the ward is, it's kind of in a cluster of messiness right now, and it needs someone that doesn't have corruption tied to them. It needs someone who doesn't have a history in endorsing people like Rahm Emanuel, and a history in endorsing, just people that are obviously not for our community. And unfortunately, we have to pick between these two candidates.
I don't see them talking about how they're going to make the neighborhood better from lowering crime, improving, streetlights. Just the basic quality of life things that we need to address in this neighborhood are not being addressed, because 80% of the conversation is about gentrification, as if there aren't any other issues in this neighborhood. They seem to be running a campaign where they're all saying the exact same thing. There's one or two candidates that are differentiating themselves, but it just doesn't seem like they are, again, to me, doing what Alderman Solis said, which is maybe responding to or reacting to the all of the noise that some community groups make.
I think there's a lot of loud enough actions, activities, just personal investment from a lot of people that live here that keep it hopeful. Now, is that realistic? Again, I go back to that, about money, and I think as Latinos, we need to really be mindful of how we spend our money, where we spend it, and that could be an impact. And just doing things like this and talking about it and making it a normal thing to talk about, and not make it, people come in here and they're like, they don't like saying the word gentrification. It feels like, dirty to them, or it feels like they're talking about a bad thing, and it's like, no, it's a very normal word to use.
Technically, an alderman is the maintenance man of a neighborhood. They don't have a ton of political power. They're in charge of providing city services. If there's a pothole in your street, you call the alderman, he calls the right department to get it filled. If there is your garbage people haven't come to pick up your garbage in 2 weeks, that's when you call your alderman. Your alderman is not going to be your Jesus Christ, your savior, to your major political issues, right? This is just at a city level. So I think when people blame it on the alderman, number one, they don't know what an alderman is. Number two, they've never worked with an alderman, or they don't really know what the alderman has the power to do. Gentrification is a systemic issue that an alderman doesn't have the power to change on their own.
I think it's important to note that we've come a long way where we don't have to keep our head on a swivel like we used to in this neighborhood. And so for that, it's impacted my life in a positive light. I've had younger brothers who didn't have to do the same things that I had to do.
I am very hopeful for the future of Pilsen, because every day I wake up and I fundamentally believe that I want to live my time, and I want to raise children, and I want to impact the community so that they will feel that every day they worked to make this world a better place. And when you have that passion and the people around you feel the same way, we're all working to make sure Pilsen is being served in a better way tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after.
So that's what I like to see. I like to see Pilsen continue in the spirit of what it is. I don't expect it to be, it's not 90% Mexican American anymore. I don't expect that to be the case, but I do hope that it can stay mixed income and welcoming to immigrants from wherever they might come from.
Because we're looking at the future, we're looking at hopefully this community of Mexicans, Latinos, expanding, because you can't fit all the 1 million or 2 million Latinos in one little neighborhood. You have to look at the whole, a much broader picture. A good example of something like that working is in Chinatown. Chinatown used to be focused in the area where I represent, but now a lot of Chinese are expanding into the 11th Ward and the 12th Ward, and they're doing it successfully. So they don't see themselves as being gentrified, they see themselves as expanding. And that's the vision that myself, Alderman Cardenas, Alderman Munoz, Chuy Garcia have of this pilot project.
If this is a neighborhood we care about and we care about sustaining and preserving as what it has always been, then that's something as a community we need to come together and fight for. Just like when, remember when SB 1070 came out and they said, all immigrants are gonna get deported, and if you've ever even known an immigrant or if an immigrant lives with you currently, then you're guilty too. And then everybody came out and marched and made sure that that bill was dead. That's the same thing we need to do. If this is something that we care about, we can't just be like the alderman or it's your fault. No, let's come together as a community, let's get organized, and let's demand what we want to demand. But if we don't ever come together and we don't ever agree on our demands, then these things are not going to happen. And then it's just going to be a lot of division like we've seen so far. A lot of these little organizations that their only job right now, as we can see, is to cause and stir up division and drama to distract us from the actual solutions that we should be working towards.
It may be too late for gentrification. Gentrification has a life of its own in Pilsen now. It's not at the mercy of the alderman. Gentrification depends on the alderman for zoning changes, and so at least the under-zone Pilsen so that the alderman has a lot of control of that. So I think a progressive person can at least mitigate a lot of what is going on. It can at least include the community in whatever is happening. But I don't think it can reverse gentrification.
Are you hopeful for the future of Pilsen?
I am, but I'm also wary. And I'm hopeful because I think that it's a great neighborhood. I would like to live here, I would like to raise my family here, but there are a lot of things that kind of make you think whether you want to or not. And I think that when you go back, and I can show you articles from the 70s and documentaries on Channel 11 about Pilsen's gonna gentrify that go back 30, 40 years. You could replay those stories, read those articles, and assume they were written last week. And so that is a really big concern. When they're talking about issues 30 years ago and talking about how the schools are bad and there's investors coming in and buying property, they're more afraid of developers coming in than of the gangs that ran their neighborhood. Right? Like everyone is more afraid of some hipster with a latte than some gang member down the block with a gun. And they take the threats of gentrification to almost the point where nothing else matters. And I think that is my concern with Pilsen, is that another documentary will happen in 10 years or in 20 years, and the conversation will be stagnant. It will be the same thing that I'm saying today is the same conversation that will happen in 20 years. And that's not progress.
This is going to be one of the things that helps clean up this part of the neighborhood right here. And we're hoping that from here on that we can have some more positive things happening around here for all the people in this neighborhood. Hopefully, this library is going to be the start. It's going to be the symbol of what we have to do to
Can you hear me? To the candidates, take a good look at the leaders behind you. These are the community-based organizations leaders, and they are also the sponsors of this forum. One of you will be elected alderperson on February 26th, and we are putting all 5 of you on notice that we will be vigilant and will demand accountability. Take a good look at the candidates and go out to vote. This concludes our event. Thank you so
much. Hoy día luna, día pena. Hoy me levanto sin razón, hoy me levanto y no quiero. Hoy día luna, día pena. Hoy día luna, día pena. Hoy me levanto sin razón, hoy me levanto y no veo. Hay cualquier solución. Arriba la luna, orea. Arriba la luna, orea. Hoy día luna, día pena. Hoy me levanto sin razón. Hoy me levanto y no quiero. Hoy día luna, día muero. Arriba la luna. Arriba la